this session. Thank you.
It's a great honor and an even greater pleasure for me to introduce my colleague and my good friend, Susanna Hindenburg. In fact, she does not need an introduction. She's well known in the scientific community, but I may share some information about her which you do not know. Susanna studied social and economic history at Stockholm University, Linköping University, and Uppsala University. She wrote, and you may not know this, several textbooks in history for all levels of the school system and the university. She received an award for the best history book in Sweden in 2011. In 2014, she was rewarded with the Swedish Sport Historians Award for her unique research on equestrian sport. She became a professor in sports sciences at Malmö University in 2009 as the first female professor in this field in Sweden. Since then, she did extensive work on equestrian sports and on gender issues. She has also a close connection to ECSS as a member of the scientific board and a co-editor of the European Journal of Sports Sciences. Currently, Susanna is working on a project about the future of children in youth sport in the Swedish Confederation of Sport. Susanna does not only research about sport, she is also an athlete, a former European champion in Tai Chi Chuan, and currently an excellent horseback rider. So she shares his knowledge and she talks about the topic sport and physical activity for a sustainable body, past, present and future challenges. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gertrude. It's great to see you all here. Welcome again. And I think I'll come to this from a bit of a different angle, Jens. This is a scientific congress still, and this may be a provoking statement for some of you, others not. I'm certain that many of you sitting here today have aims and purposes with your research that go well beyond scientific results. Aims and purposes related to improving sports, increasing physical activity, and changing the society. I guess that some of you work in order to improve performance and results in training and competition, making sure that the athlete's body is well prepared and kept free from injuries, and that in case of injuries, the rehabilitation is adjusted to the demands of the individual athlete and the specific sport. Improvement, however, is not only connected to physiology or biomechanics. Philosophers help us understand how the concepts we use can be understood in different ways, are complicated and multidimensional, and influence the way in which we perceive the world, not the least sports. Questions regarding governmental policies, relative age effect, economic constraints, ideas about race, ethnicity, and gender interest social scientists, and many of them can be defined as critical friends of sport, and try to influence sports in order to make sport organizations better adjusted to the demands of governments, sponsors, sport participants, and the big group of people who are not active in sports. Even though all of you pose and answer a wide range of questions, it seems to me that you have something important in common. You are interested in the future. Am I right? And now I'm looking for, can I change my PowerPoints with something?
Yeah, sorry. I just changed it.
Okay, thank you. I and some of my colleagues come from another background. We are historians. How does an historian fit into a scientific field in which the future is of central importance? I ask myself that same question many times. Why study history? Well, a simple answer can be that it's good to know something about history if you want to understand what's happening right now. It is also important if you want to influence the future, or to quote Winston Churchill, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In some of the keynotes in previous ECSS conferences, you've been given examples of this. I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to Professor Lars Engbretsen's presentation on the Olympic Medical Committee's work from past to present, or Professor Barbara Ainsworth's presentation on how research on physical activity has changed over time, or, not to forget, Bengt Saltin's honorary lecture on his work. All three of them were good examples of how history can be mapped out. For an historian, it's of special interest to explain how and why something is changing, or not changing, over time. Theoretical perspectives are used to explain continuity and change. Another important question for the historian is whether agents or some individuals create change, or whether change and continuity are explained by social, economic, and cultural structures. In addition, how power relations work is of special importance for the historian. Everyone can, with a starting point in their own history, look ahead and think about how they want to live their lives in the future, or how they wish the future society to be formed. When studying history or reading a book about history, it is, however, important to consider what history is. History is, in one way, everything that has happened until now, but all this does not end up in a history book. To understand what I mean, I would like you to imagine a mountain. The mountain is there, but it can be described in many different ways, depending on who is describing it for whom and for what reason. It is possible to describe how high the mountain is, which minerals that are included in the stone, what grows on the mountain, or to describe the easiest way to climb it. The pilot wants to know something about the height. The geologist is more interested in the minerals, while a biologist might be especially curious about a rare flower that is said to be growing on this mountain. The study of history is very similar. There are historical facts, but an historian makes choices about which facts to present, using theoretical perspectives that will explain continuity or change. An historian also has to choose how history should be presented in relation to who is listening. To make an historical account transparent, these choices have to be presented to the listener or to the reader. When this is done, the analysis can be questioned and discussed in an academic way. I'll try to explain what I mean using a few examples. To start with continuity, our common biological background. Homo sapiens developed more than 100,000 years ago in Africa. They were hunters and gatherers. Since then, human bodies have undergone some, but slight, universal and some more regional changes. Some connected to that groups of humans started to leave Africa 60 to 80,000 years ago. About 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic Revolution occurred. Then societies changed greatly as humans started to develop agriculture. Now workload changed. People had to work longer hours. Diets changed and new diseases developed and spread as people lived closer together. It is, however, during the last hundreds of years that men and women, boys and girls have met the greatest changes when it comes to our environment. Social, economic and cultural conditions have changed tremendously, affecting us in many ways. The agricultural society has left room for the industrial society or the service society in many countries. My major point is that the main changes that occurred when Homo sapiens appeared has not happened again when it comes to genetics. Our societies have, however, changed, and the economic, social and cultural change have had an impact on our bodies. An understanding of how this works is essential if we want to influence the future. Professor Arne Astrup, who is also the head of the Department of Nutrition, Exercise and Sports at Copenhagen University, expressed it very clearly at the International Summer School for PhD students that Professor Gertrud Pfister and her colleagues arrange every summer. He said, 40 years ago, sports scientists thought that if we could only find a perfect exercise and a perfect combination of nutrition, we could stop obesity and physical inactivity in the Western countries. As we all know, this didn't happen. In order to understand this, we need to comprehend perceptions and ideas of the body, if I remember right what Astrup said. It is, however, extremely complex. I will give you some historical examples to demonstrate this. And I will start with an example about health issues. In the 18th century, statistical methods were developed in Europe in order to keep track of, among other things, demographic movements like population size and health. From being interested in religious education of children, governments were now also interested in children's health. As the statisticians could prove that it was the infant mortality rate, not migration, that stopped population growth. An important outcome of their work. were measures developed in order to decrease infant mortality rates, not the least the Swedish astronomer and statistician Per Wargentin, who were interested in the British economist, philosopher and statistician. You could be many things at that time. Sir William Petty's work on demography and mercantilism played an important role in this. You may not know this, but Sweden has the oldest demographic records on a national level in the world, already established in 1749, making it possible to map out and explain the so-called first phase of the demographic transition, answering questions like how and why did the infant mortality rate decrease in the 19th century? Statisticians of that time has given us a fantastic source material that help us using modern statistical methods to demonstrate that almost half of the infants living in the cities and about 1 in 5 in countryside died before the age of 1 year at that time. Today, Sweden has an infant mortality rate of 3 per 1,000. That is an enormous change. What can account for this? Well, the disease panorama has changed, and sometimes the diet, for the Swedish case, it's the potato, and vaccination against smallpox are presented as explanations for this change. There is, however, another important factor as well. People seem to have changed their behavioral patterns, not the least the way in which infants and children were taken care of. In the 18th century, breastfeeding was a big issue in Europe. The Swedish botanist Carl von Linné and the first pediatrician Nils Rosén von Rosenstein explained the importance of breastfeeding in cheap books reaching large groups of people. But there are other interesting factors to study as well. People's habits did not just change because there was information, vaccination, and new food. So what happened? To explain change, historians study the actions of certain agents that I've already presented to you here, material changes, for example, environmental and economic change, and ideational changes, changes of ideas. The latter is closely linked to the changing patterns of behavior regarding the caretaking of children at that time. Information coupled with literacy, and not the least literacy among women, and secularization. The latter closely connected to a changed perception of how humans could influence life expectancy. And that was the ground for the changing caretaking of children. So let us go back to sport history. Many sport historians point to that modern sport was developed in the English public schools, where young men of the British Empire were to be formed. This kind of sport was, however, not the only kind of body culture and physical activity. From a Swedish perspective, Per Henrik Ling, born in the 18th century, strongly influenced body culture and physical education in schools up until at least the 1950s. In Germany and many other countries, turn and gymnastics influenced in a similar way. Ling, who was a fencing master at Lund University and later a PE teacher and a fencing master at Karlberg in Stockholm, developed the Ling gymnastics. Ling gymnastics aimed to make its practitioners find a correct, right body balance, ideas based in the science of that time. The means for this were discipline and mechanical movements. An important idea was that gymnastics would help people to live in harmony with the surrounding environment. Ling gymnastics were developed over time, and towards the end of the 19th century, when the so-called modern sport was spread, the followers of Ling were in conflict with representatives of the modern sport. A study by a Swedish sport historian, Pia Lundqvist-Wanneberg, clearly demonstrates that in schools the conflict was related to social class issues. Whereas upper-class boys were taught modern sports, working-class boys were taught Ling gymnastics. The reason for this was that the former were supposedly future leaders and were to be taught competitiveness, whereas the latter were supposed to be trained in cooperation. Another conflict seen in the 19th century was the one concerning gender and physical activity. 19th century was filled with paradoxical ideas about women and femininity. There were, for example, strong voices, among them Herbert Spencer, advocating that the female body was not strong enough for learning, for example, mathematics or sporting activities. Women had to use their energy to give birth and to take care of children. An interesting paradox connected to social class developed as some women were seen as strong and very capable of hard physical work, women from the working class or from the peasantry, whereas others were seen as weak and dependent, upper-class women. And paradoxically, some of these women were the ones who were participating in sport and developing mathematics of that time. You may all have heard of Alexandra Kollontai, of course. These perceptions of the female body influenced gymnastics, and a special form of female gymnastics developed. It also influenced women's possibilities of participating in modern sports, and not the least in the Olympics. The ideas of the weak, infirm female body was seen as the opposite of the strong male body, a body that was connected to power in society. In that way, sport and physical activity became important tools for governments wanting to shape the modern citizen. Not all bodies were, as I've already demonstrated, given the same role. Gender, ethnicity, social class, and age were important demarcations. During the 20th century, ideas of the female body has changed, even though it's clear that men and women do not have the same opportunities in sport, and that, like in other sectors of the society, sports are gendered in that different sports are more connected to masculinities, whereas others are more connected to femininity, even though the connection can change over time. In Sweden, one of the most dramatic changes connected to sport has been the feminization of equestrian sports. From being strongly connected to men and masculinity, equestrian sports are today connected to women and femininity. Economic change, like the motorization, as well as ideational changes, can account for this change. But this is a long story that I will tell you some other time. So, what does this tell us about today's challenges? Today, life expectancy in Sweden and in many other countries has increased, and today in Sweden it is about 80 years for men and about 84 for women. And the proportion of the population, about 60, is now about 26%. This is a new challenge, and Wargentin and his contemporaries of the 18th century Sweden could not have imagined that this could have happened, even if there were old people in the 18th century too. Societies face new challenges, some connected to economy. Who will be available at the labor market? Who will take care of the old and sick? And who will pay for this caretaking? Others connected to health issues. A new disease panorama connected to that we live longer, eat differently, and are not as physically active as we used to be. And not the least, health and inequality issues. Today we know that physical activity is good for all human bodies. But how can that knowledge change behaviors? In an interesting study, Gertrude again, analyzes the intersection of gender, age, and social class and sport and physical activity. She points to that sport is an area in which masculinity and youth are celebrated and rewarded, and that women, because of this, face a double barrier for the participation. Even so, there seems to be an increasing number of older women in Western countries who participate in sporting activities. In order to explain this, Pfister points to the importance of studying social class background together with gender and age. She underlines in her study that it is the middle-class women who participate. Pfister depicts narratives and demonstrates that these women participate as a means of resistance to aging, but also to gender stereotypes. In addition, the narratives provide insights into the various negotiations which allow aging women to cope with gendered expectations and to be successful in a field which is dominated by young men. In another study, a Swedish sociologist, Josefin Eman, demonstrates that ideas of gender influence sport participation for older men too. Focusing on self-images, she shows that old male athletes withdraw from the practice of competitive sports as it's not considered an age-appropriate activity. So, to go back to the changing health of infants, what was important in the changing process at that time was that people had information on how to change and how to take care of, how to change the caretaking of children, and that they were willing to change their behavior. So what about the present? Well, to listen to Pfister and Eman, gender constructions and social class need to be depicted and challenged. Otherwise, it will be impossible to create a society in which men, women, boys and girls are physically active or participate in sport activities. I believe, just like it was the case with the change of the infant mortality rate, that knowledge about our perception of the body is crucial and that to increase physical activity rates or to increase sport participation, if that is what we think is important, we have to know what barriers different age groups, people from different social classes and cultural backgrounds face, and how they analyze their own future opportunities. We also have to challenge these to change society and to remove economic, social and cultural barriers. So what is my take-home message to you? The human body in the form of Homo sapiens were formed more than 100,000 years ago. And to understand what and why our bodies have changed since then, we need knowledge about physiology, biomechanics, and the social, economic, and cultural context in which bodies have existed and still exists. So let us work together and demonstrate that we as scientists within a multidisciplinary field are better equipped than some other scientists to pose and answer questions that will bring change to the future. And let me change the title of my presentation to Sport and Physical Activity for a Sustainable Body, a challenge and opportunity for the multidisciplinary field of sports science. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this wonderful lecture. And as a former historian and a sociologist, I'm very pleased to see how our approach and our science contribute to an understanding of the situation today, and maybe also about insights into the future. I thank you also for the wonderful examples which you gave, which illustrated your arguments. And we have some time for questions, so I'm asking the audience, is there anything you want to ask, you want to know, and which Susanna may be able to answer? Is there anybody? A question? If not, then I will ask you something. What do you think are the decisive issues, current issues, which will have a large impact on the future? What is currently decisively different from the past, and which will maybe...
It's maybe not decisively different from the past, but I think the most important question that we have to raise and try to give answer to is how to change the unequal health in the world.
Yeah.
Just heard yesterday from the State Secretary that inequality has actually increased during the last few years, measured in life expectancy, but that there are also other inequality discussions, of course. Who can actually participate in sport? In Sweden, we always say we have a very open sport organization for many different people, and it's very easy to get in there because it's so cheap if you compare it to more commercialized sports. On the other hand, as was shown in the governmental report not very long ago, in our country that is seen as one of the more equal countries, we have some quite expensive sports too. And I think in my new project with young people and children, they also talk about their experiences with physical activity and sport as they were living in two different countries. It's very different for different people, just dependent on social class today again. So that's a big issue, I think.
Is now somebody who would like to ask a question? Still is an opportunity. Yes, there is somebody behind. And I think I agree very much with you that we have to look at differences. So we live in a part of the world where many things are possible, and we have to also really reflect how can we transfer these developments, can we transfer our knowledge and developments to other parts of the world. But there's somebody who wants to...
Thank you very much for your talk. I enjoyed it very much. I got a lot out of it. I'm wondering if you'd agree with the following statements. You know, on average, the world has probably never been as highly educated as it is now. On average, there's probably never been a less active, physically active world than there is now. So your historical overview about when how behaviour has changed was particularly interesting. And I'm wondering what you think the reason is that people, highly educated people, who know a lot about the fact that we know, I mean, we've got a room full of people here who are engaged in the science of putting evidence behind why people should be more physically active for their own good, and yet they're not. And it seems to be getting worse, not better. From a historian's point of view, what's going to make the difference? Where are we going to get to a tipping point where behaviour changes and physical activity improves or increases?
That's the Nobel Prize question. If I answer this, we really know what to do. But I'd say that we as scientists, we don't really reach out in the way that we are not... We know a lot about what to do, but we're not sure how to get people to do it. But instead of just telling people what to do, we should probably cooperate much more with people and ask them. So to make you, I remember the ECSS Congress in Liverpool. There was there was a very interesting session on how the football organization try to influence supporters to be more physically active. And I think they started off, maybe some of you were to that session or presented in it, and in the beginning they started off just saying to the football supporters, men of a certain age with in a certain weight category, that well, come and we will help you. Nobody came. And then they started to ask, so why didn't you come? Well, to eat my chips and to drink my beer and to have my cigarettes, that's the best part of the week, so why would I come? And then they started to do it in a different way. They invited families, for example. And if you listen to Amartya Sen, I think you would go back to infant mortality rates. Women have a great potential in this when it comes to changing families and households. That is maybe not used so much yet.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And I think this is your topic and the question about how things developed, but even more important, how will they continue? This will, of course, bother us in the future. And I thank you again for the presentation. And I invite everybody, maybe after the session also, to continue with the discussion.